already, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jacqueline, and today I'm bringing you a mystery video. According to the season, we are in the end of October, so I wanted to bring something to my channel to be a story. Well, it's actually a real story, a real mystery that occurred. I wanted to bring it out, and it's a very sad story, and also I wanted just to bring awareness to it, and I wanted to share it out with y'all. So if you enjoy any of these mystery videos, give this video a thumbs up so I know you like them so I can create more. So without further ado, let's just jump into this story. And this story is actually a very unsolved mystery till this day, and it occurred in 1945. I'm gonna give you a little bit of background before I start telling y'all the story. This story starts off with the Sodder family, which they were a family of 12. The couple had 10 children, and the father of the children, his name was George Sodder, and he actually migrated from Italy to Pennsylvania when he was about 13 years old, I believe. So he migrated there, he started working at a railroad company, and then after a couple years he wanted to start his own trucking company. So he ended up moving to West Virginia to a city called Fayetteville, where he began his trucking business, where he would haul like dirt and stuff like that. That was his business that he started. Well, whenever he moved there, he ended up meeting Jenny Capriani, and I believe that's how you say her name. So he ended up meeting Jenny Capriani, and her parents actually ran a store. It was like a music store, and it was called the Music Box, and that's actually where her and George ran into each other. And they later on got married and had 10 children. So basically the story takes place in Christmas of 1945. The couple had been married for a couple of years now. They had 10 children. The oldest one was about 23 years old, I believe. I'm just gonna be giving y'all the names of all of the children so y'all can have kind of like a chronological order of how old they were. So the oldest one, I believe, or I'm not sure if he was the second oldest, his name was Joe, and during this 1945 event he actually wasn't there because he had joined the army, so he was away with the army, and he wasn't there when this occurred. But at this time of 1945, the oldest, or the second oldest, his name was John, he was 23. There was Marion, who was 17. George Jr., which he was named after the father, he was actually 16. Maurice was 14. Martha was 12. Louis was 9. Jenny was 8. Betty was 5. And then finally Sylvia was the youngest one, and she was 2 during this time. So these are all the ages. They were very close in age. They were like a lot of kids. 10 kids is a lot. Like I said, this story does take place on Christmas Eve of 1945. So it was Christmas Eve. It was already turning into Christmas Day. The couple, Jenny and George, decided to let their kids open a couple of gifts before sending them off to bed. So the kids were getting done like around 12:30ish, where they were already like all going to bed. And they had a 2-story house. So around 12:30ish, after the kids had already gone to bed, the phone started ringing. And back in the day, it was 1945, they had a house phone there, but of course cell phones did not exist back in the day. So their house phone was actually located in George's office, which I believe was downstairs. So Jenny, the mom, she ended up going downstairs, answering the phone, and it was very odd whenever she answered it, because it was this woman on the phone asking for a name that Jenny was not familiar with. So Jenny was like, this person's not here, but in the background she could hear like laughter and glasses clicking, and I guess they were having a Christmas party. It doesn't really specify why she heard that, but they were like laughing and having a good time. It was during the holidays, and it was turning into Christmas Day. So Jenny was like, no, there's no one here. So she ended up hanging up the phone. She saw that the downstairs lights were actually on, and that the door was unlocked, the windows were open, and Marion was her 17-year-old daughter. She was asleep on the couch. So Jenny ended up going to lock the door, close the blinds, and just turn off the light, make sure everything was good. And she thought that her kids were already all in bed, that Marion was the only one sleeping on the couch. So she headed up to bed and ended up kind of like falling asleep. And in the midst of like 30 minutes, she heard a loud thump on the ceiling and something rolling down, but she didn't really make anything of it. She just wasn't sure what it was, and so she began to fall asleep. So at around 1 o'clock, there was a heavy smell of smoke in the house. So Jenny and George actually slept with their youngest daughter, Sylvia. So they ended up getting up and they rushed out of the house with the baby, and I believe it was John. It was John, Marion was the one sleeping on the couch. Then it was George Jr. and Sylvia. So there were 4 of them, because remember how Joe wasn't there. He wasn't there during this incident. So 4 of the children with the parents ran out of the house, and they realized that the house was catching fire. So whenever they realized that, George, of course, he thought of his children. There were still 5 of the children still inside the house. So what he decided to do is he tried to get in through the front door. The front door was completely filled with smoke and he couldn't get in. He broke through a window, and once he was doing that, once he broke through that window, he actually ended up like cutting up his arm. And then the next thing he thought of was to look for a ladder. So the family usually kept the ladder at the side of the house, but during this, like everything that was occurring at night, I mean, it was like around 1 o'clock in the morning, and he could not find the ladder where he always kept it. So he did try to go to his like hauling truck to pull it up to the house, and whenever he was trying to turn it on, it had turned on completely perfect the day before, but right now during this time, it did not turn on for anything. Like he just tried and tried. I mean, it could have been the cold, because I mean, it was West Virginia, it could have been snowing, and the truck could have froze, but the truck could not turn on, so he couldn't get the truck up to the house. So Marion, the 17-year-old daughter that was sleeping on the couch, she ended up taking off to the neighbor's house, and then he went running to the neighbor's house. She told them to let her borrow the phone because her house was catching on fire, and she ended up trying to reach the operator from the police department. But again, it was during Christmas Eve / Christmas Day, and it was in 1945, so the operator did not pick up. She tried multiple times, no one would pick up. And in the story that I was reading, it says that a neighbor actually was riding through, and he saw that the house was catching on fire, and he went into town and he did try to call the operator again, and no one picked up. So then after that, the police ended up showing up to their house till 8 a.m. So the house was basically, it burnt down, and there was nothing they could do about it. So at 8 a.m., the police ended up showing up, and like the investigators, and there was nothing left of the house. It was basically just rubble. Like it was just brought to the floor, and everything was burnt down. And whenever they saw the place, they saw where the fire occurred, the house, they said that the bodies were not found there. They could not find anything of the Sodder children, like no bodies were there. And one of the investigators even said that maybe it was too hot, that the bodies actually incinerated themselves. And if you don't know what that is basically your body would be burned to ashes because of how high the heat is. So that's one of the reasons why the investigators thought that they could not find the bodies. So basically before the New Year's, actually the police department came out with 5 death certificates for the children. Even though that their bodies could not be found, they just decided to declare them dead at the scene, that they died because of fire and asphyxiation, even though their bodies were not found there. So that is how they left it off, and that is how the police basically ruled it. But the parents were not quite convinced. I mean, imagine yourself if you have your kids and out of nowhere, like your house burns down and there's no bodies to be found. The parents were not convinced. They weren't sure what happened, but they knew that their kids couldn't have been dead. Like something must have happened. Something must have gone wrong. So there was a lot of odd events leading up to the fire. The first one being, so the first event that the Sodder family recalled was from George. George actually had a man come over to their house, and he was actually looking for work. And he just came up like out of nowhere, like kind of randomly just came up to his house, made his way to the back of the house. He pointed at a fuse box and he actually said, "This is gonna catch fire someday," which was kind of odd because George had the local power company come and check that fuse box out just because he was kind of worried about it. And they said that it was completely fine. The box was no harm to the family. The fuse box was completely fine. So George found it kind of odd later on, like recalling that memory that that man said that, and like it was just a random man out of nowhere, and that's all he said. And he didn't get the job, like he didn't get any jobs with George or anything. He just left and was never seen again. Another one of the odd events that actually occurred was getting close to when the fire happened. He was a life insurance person that was trying to sell basically life insurance to George. And I guess back in the day, they would have like salesmen coming up to your house and telling you like, hey, you should buy insurance for your whole family. Whenever George said that he wasn't interested in buying life insurance, the man actually ended up getting really, really upset. And he said, quote unquote, "Your goddamn house is going to catch up in smoke." he warned, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to pay for all the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. So he literally said that, and it was very specific, the things that he said, and that actually occurred a couple of weeks or months before the fire occurred. One of the things that it did say there was that he was making remarks about Mussolini, and Mussolini, I had no clue who he was. He was actually an Italian dictator back in that day, back in 1945, and George was not a huge fan of him. And in Fayetteville, where he lived, there was a bunch of Italian people, and they were basically a fan of Mussolini. He like ruled Italy at that time, and so George was very against that. And so him and some of the neighbors would argue, like heated arguments they would come up, because George did not support Mussolini, and most of the community there of Fayetteville did. The life insurance guy actually said to him that his kids were going to be destroyed because of his house was going to catch on fire, which is very odd for someone to say. But anyway, so that's like one of the odd events that also occurred before the fire. And the last one was that one of the oldest Sodder children actually saw a man parked outside of US Highway 21, close to where they lived. And that man was actually waiting and seeing where the little kids came out of the bus from school. They would walk home, and he was actually there seeing them. And then one of the older brothers saw that he was doing that. But he didn't really think much of it. Another one of the weird things that they did think was kind of like odd about it was the phone call that they got. A woman asking for someone, and like the glasses clicking and everything, and the laughter behind. Like she wasn't Jenny wasn't sure if that had to do with anything of the fire or anything like that. After the fire occurred, the telephone repair company actually came out to their house and said that the wires were actually cut. It did not look like it had been burnt down, because I mean you can see whenever wires have been burnt, but no, these wires had been cut. So actually the fire must have been like, they must have done it, someone must have done it. It couldn't have been like out of nowhere. So that's whenever the family started realizing that it wasn't an accident, it was someone that was trying to get to them. For the next few years, leads did come in, because the picture was posted everywhere. They even had in Fayetteville, they had like a whole sign, I'll put it here on the screen, of the picture of the 5 children, and it said missing on top, because they did realize that maybe the kids were not burnt down in the fire because there was no bodies found. And actually the kind of something that was odd was that in the fire department, the one that declared the case to be kind of like an accident, one of the members there was actually the insurance guy that was trying to sell the family insurance, which is kind of odd, because he was the one that said that because George didn't buy him the life insurance, that his house was going to catch on fire and that his kids were going to be destroyed. He was the one that voted to be ruled an accident. And so over the years, like I said, the Sodder children were actually declared missing instead of being dead, because no bodies were ever found. And they did put up like this huge sign of their little 5 faces. They decided in 1949 to open up the case again and just review the area, just to make sure that there was no bodies there, that the kids were actually missing. And they did find bones, but they weren't from the kids, any of them, because they were from 14 to 5, and the bones that they found were a male from the ages of 16 to 25, so it couldn't have possibly been the 14-year-old, even though they did maybe think it was him, but it wasn't. After all, they decided that they were not his bones, they were someone else's, because George actually ended up using some dirt to fill up the place where the fire occurred, so they must have been in that dirt. In 1968, 20 years later, Jenny received a letter with a postmark from Kentucky, and in that letter was a picture of a boy, and I'll insert it here on the screen. And then the picture in the back, it says, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, LLIL, boys, A90132 or 35. That was kind of what it said in the back of the picture. And there was a boy, he was much older now, of course, and apparently the mom thought it was Louis. It had been 20 years, so he looked like he was in his mid-20s, and the mom did see like similar features to how Louis was whenever he was younger. So they got that lead. That's whenever the family decided to hire a private investigator to go up to Kentucky. And so the guy did go up to Kentucky, and while he was there, actually he ended up disappearing with all their money, which is very sad because it was basically a scam, and the family had a lot of hope that their kids were still alive. That photograph was the last evidence that the family had from any of the children. It was just a random photograph that the mom said that it could be Louis. I mean, it did say Louis Sodder, but then again, it could have been a prank by someone. And ever since then, that was it. The father ended up dying that year, the same year where the photograph came in and the private investigator ended up disappearing. He died in 1968. And the mom still lived at the same house. She even opened up like rooms for her children because she always expected her children to eventually come back to her. But she did end up passing away in 1989. And the billboard that was actually in Fayetteville ended up coming down. There's multiple theories of why this occurred. The first one being that there was like mafia involved in this, that maybe they were trying to reach out to the dad and he did not want to join or give them money, and so they ended up doing that to his house and taking in his children. There was also another one, of course, then it's more, I believe this one more, is that the insurance guy, he ended up costing this because first of all, George did not want to buy insurance from him, and second of all, was because George was talking bad about Mussolini, which was someone he supported. So those were some of the theories that were there, but the Sodder children were never seen again. I mean, it does seem more that someone else took of the people that came forward with information that they knew about them, but over the years, nothing has ever like resurfaced, and I believe the youngest one, the youngest Sodder, which her name is Sylvia, she is now about 69, 70. And she believes that her brothers and sisters did not die during the fire, that they were taken, and that she still looks for information for them. She visits crime websites and then engages with people still interested in her family mystery. Her very first memory is of that night of 1945 when she was only 2 years old. She will never forget the sight of her father bleeding, of like just hearing everyone scream. And she is no closer now to understanding why. She does not know why. So this is why it's a mystery story that I wanted to bring out to y'all, but also it's to bring awareness to the case, that maybe someone knows something about what happened to the Sodder children. But basically, Sylvia is still looking for her brothers and sisters, or not looking for them, but looking for information of what happened to them. And I believe her daughter as well is helping her out. So I don't know, maybe y'all know some information, maybe you know something else of the case and you want to leave it down below. Make sure to leave it down below. I'll also leave all the websites that I used, that I got information from, down below as well if you want to just read on more, a little bit more about the case. Again, I hope you enjoy this video. This was just a mystery video that I wanted to try out. I do want to make more of these because I think they're very interesting. So I hope you enjoy this video. And I mean, it does have a very sad ending because none of the parents were ever able to know what happened to the children. Until this day, it's still one of the longest unsolved mysteries because no one knows exactly what happened to them. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, and I'll just see you later, alligators. Bye!